Have you ever boarded a plane, sat down in the seat you paid for, and felt the silent eyes questioning if you truly belonged there? On Attendant Flight 812, a respected black woman, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, faced that exact moment. A flight attendant demanded she move from her rightful seat not because of rules, but because of assumptions. Imagine the sting of being singled out in front of strangers, your dignity on trial at 30,000 feet. What would you do? Stay silent to avoid conflict, or stand firm, knowing the world might judge you either way? For Evelyn, the choice was clear. She calmly reached into her jacket, pulled out her FAA credentials, and changed the entire atmosphere of the cabin in an instant. The flight attendant froze. The passengers stared. And a story began that would ripple far beyond the walls of one airplane. If you were in that seat, what would your courage look like, and how far would you go to defend your dignity? Stay with us as we unfold a true story of quiet strength, systemic reckoning, and hope for change. Like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. The jet bridge always felt like a tunnel between two worlds. Behind you, the sprawl of the airport terminal with its noise, its announcements, its hurried steps. Ahead, the narrow tube leading into a sealed cabin that would soon rise above the clouds. For Evelyn Hayes, walking through it was usually a moment of calm. But that morning in Atlanta, the calm was thin. She felt the weight of unspoken things pressing against her shoulders. She stepped into the first-class cabin and adjusted her blazer. The space was meant to soothe wide leather seats, soft lighting, small vases with plastic orchids perched at the partition. Yet Evelyn sensed the subtle current immediately. A man in the front row lowered his newspaper and gave her a quick glance before snapping it back open. Two women chatting over mimosas broke off mid-sentence, then resumed with quieter voices. A young man with headphones looked at her, then quickly turned his gaze toward the window as if he had been caught staring. Evelyn knew this dance too well. The silence was not hostile, but it was heavy. It said, wordlessly, "You are unexpected here." She slid her carry-on into the overhead compartment, careful not to bump the neighboring bags, and lowered herself into seat 2A. She smoothed the crease in her skirt and took out her notebook. Her pen hovered, but her eyes strayed to the aisle where the rest of the passengers streamed in. She tried to lose herself in the details of the cabin, the hum of the ventilation, the faint scent of citrus from the cleaning spray, the soft hiss as another passenger adjusted their seat. For a moment she let her gaze settle on the safety card tucked into the seat pocket. She smiled at the thought that she had once written part of that very wording. Few passengers ever noticed the precise phrasing, "in the unlikely event." That had been her suggestion, years ago, to soften language that once sounded too grim. Her smile faded as she caught sight of the flight attendants moving briskly down the aisle. One of them, a tall woman with neatly pinned blonde hair, gave Evelyn the briefest glance, her expression unreadable. The name tag glinted, Brenda Miller. Evelyn filed it away without a thought. Across the aisle, a businessman adjusted his cufflinks and ordered sparkling water even before the boarding door had closed. The attendant who took his request bent low with a smile. When she straightened, her expression cooled again as her eyes swept over Evelyn. Evelyn turned back to her notes, but her mind drifted. She thought about her mother, who had once been asked to leave a seat at the front of a Greyhound bus despite having a ticket. She thought about her own daughter, Maya, who might one day face the same quiet challenges. The thought tightened Evelyn's chest. She whispered to herself, just under her breath. Hold your space. The boarding continued. A family with 2 young children squeezed past, the kids tugging on stuffed animals, the mother apologizing with a flustered smile. Evelyn responded with warmth. They're fine. Don't worry. Her voice was soft, but the mother's shoulders relaxed. Moments like that reminded Evelyn why she chose patience, even when it cost her. As the line thinned, Evelyn noticed one more detail. Toward the back of the plane, a passenger in a bulky coat was speaking earnestly with Brenda. The two exchanged nods, and Brenda patted the passenger's arm with a look of sympathy. Evelyn caught only fragments of the conversation, something about special needs and finding a solution. Evelyn did not dwell on it, not yet. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. She tried to imagine the next 5 hours, the plane ascending, the horizon stretching wide, the steady rhythm of engines carrying her west. She pictured landing at San Francisco International, stepping out into cool coastal air, and walking straight into the conference where she was scheduled to speak about systemic safety compliance. She had worked on her remarks late into the night, highlighting how overlooked details and unchecked latch, a skipped briefing, could cascade into disaster. The irony would strike her later. For now, she allowed herself to believe this flight was only a prelude to that speech. The final call echoed through the cabin. Flight attendants, prepare doors for departure. The captain's voice followed, steady and calm, announcing the route, the weather, the expected flight time. Evelyn opened her eyes, pen poised again, and made a note. 400 miles, clear skies, moderate winds. She had always loved the precision of numbers. But before the plane could push back, a shadow fell across her notebook. Evelyn looked up to see Brenda standing in the aisle, hands clasped, expression set in a polite mask. "Ma'am," Brenda said, her tone clipped but courteous. "I'll need you to switch seats. This one is required for another passenger." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Evelyn blinked once, letting the ripples spread inside her. She thought she had misheard, but Brenda's steady gaze told her she had not. Evelyn's pen lowered to the page. She glanced down at her boarding pass lying on the tray table, clearly marked 2-0. She lifted it gently, held it out, and said in her calmest voice, "This is my assigned seat." Brenda gave a small, tight smile. "Yes, I understand, but we have a passenger who needs special accommodation. It would be best if you moved." Around them, the cabin grew quieter. The businessman with cufflinks shifted in his seat to listen. The 2 women with mimosas whispered behind their hands. Evelyn felt their eyes pressing in. She inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "I'm sorry, but this is my seat. I purchased it. I'm comfortable here." Brenda's smile thinned further. "Let's not make this difficult." The words hung in the air, sharper than they sounded. Evelyn heard the edge beneath the politeness. She heard the history of those words, the way they had been used to silence people who resisted, to press them into submission. Her heart began to pound, but her face remained composed. Inside, though, a familiar conflict stirred. She wanted peace. She wanted to get to San Francisco without incident. But she also wanted dignity, and dignity had a way of demanding its own defense. As Brenda waited, Evelyn folded the boarding pass neatly and slid it back into the folder. She looked up with eyes calm but unyielding. "This is my seat," she said again, each word deliberate. The silence stretched. The hum of the ventilation seemed louder now. somewhere in the cabin. A phone vibrated on a tray table. Evelyn's fingers rested lightly on her notebook, her mind already sensing that the moment was about to turn. This was no longer just a routine flight. It was becoming something else, something larger than the four walls of the cabin, and deep down. Evelyn knew whatever came next would not stay contained to this plane. For a moment, Evelyn Hayes wondered if she had misheard. The request seemed so out of place, so detached from logic, that her mind resisted it. She glanced again at the boarding pass in her hand. Seat 2A, clear, paid, verified at the gate. Nothing about it was uncertain. Yet here stood Brenda Miller, posture stiff, eyes cool, words pressed through a smile that carried no warmth. The businessman across the aisle set his water glass down with a quiet clink, pretending to scroll his phone while his ears leaned closer. The two women with mimosas tilted their heads just slightly, lips parted, waiting. Passengers always knew when something unusual was unfolding, even before it became obvious. Evelyn placed her pen down on the tray, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the notebook, a small ritual of control. She spoke softly, her tone calm but immovable. "This is my seat. It is printed clearly on the boarding pass. I'm settled here, and I intend to remain." Brenda's smile thinned into something taut. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice in a way meant to sound confidential, but instead carried threat. "Ma'am, we have a passenger in need of medical accommodation. This seat is necessary. I'm asking you to cooperate so we can avoid complications." The word complications landed like a warning bell. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She looked past Brenda, toward the passenger in the bulky coat who was now standing further down the aisle, waiting, eyes darting with impatience. Evelyn's mind sharpened. Why this seat? Why 2O? Specifically, the cabin had other options, but Brenda's focus was locked on her, as if Evelyn herself were the inconvenience. Evelyn lifted her chin slightly. "I understand your concern for another passenger, but my seat is not available. I purchased it. I will not be moving." Brenda's mask slipped. For a second, the polite facade dropped, revealing something harder underneath. Her voice dropped further, each syllable edged. "Let's not make this difficult. You don't want to be marked as a disruptive passenger." The words hit Evelyn like ice water. Disruptive passenger, a phrase with sharp teeth. She had investigated cases where passengers, mostly people of color, had been escorted off planes under that very label. It was a phrase that could destroy reputations, derail careers, leave scars that lasted far longer than a flight. Her heart began to pound. She felt a rush of heat under her skin, but outwardly she remained composed. She thought of her daughter, Maya, texting her just an hour ago, excited about college brochures, full of hope. What would Maya say if she saw her mother give in quietly, sliding out of her rightful place? And what would she think if she saw her mother escorted off a plane in handcuffs? Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Her mother's voice rose in her memory, steady and unwavering. "Hold your space, baby. You don't have to prove you deserve it. You already do." She opened her eyes again and fixed them calmly on Brenda. "I am not being disruptive. I am sitting in the seat assigned to me. That is all." The cabin was silent now, the background murmur gone. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. Evelyn could feel the collective gaze of strangers pressing against her. Some sympathetic, some curious, some doubtful. She knew what they saw, a black woman, well-dressed, calm, refusing to move. She also knew what assumptions flickered behind their eyes. One man in the third row leaned toward his companion and whispered, though not quietly enough, "It's just a seat. Why not let it go?" The whisper burned. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her notebook. She wanted to answer him, to explain that it was never just a seat. It was always more than that. It was about being told, again and again, that you did not belong. No matter how many degrees you earned, no matter how many titles you carried, no matter how much you paid. But she didn't speak to him. She kept her gaze on Brenda. Brenda crossed her arms, exhaling through her nose. "If you continue to refuse, I'll have to escalate this. Security can be called before we leave the gate." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her voice still even. "If you believe that is necessary, you may do so. But I am not moving. Inside, though." Her stomach churned. She pictured uniformed officers boarding the plane, their hands hovering near cuffs, their eyes scanning for trouble. She pictured herself rising, humiliated, walking back down the aisle under the weight of every stare, the shame of it pressed close. Yet another image rose to meet it, her daughter Maya, standing tall at a future graduation stage, diploma in hand, glancing into the crowd to see her mother watching proudly. That vision steadied her. She would not model surrender. She would model dignity. Brenda's jaw tightened. She straightened, her voice louder now, audible to nearby rows. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a final opportunity to comply voluntarily." The phrase "final opportunity" hung in the air like a verdict. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, but her voice, when it came, was steady as stone. "This is not a matter of opportunity. This is a matter of right. I will not surrender my seat." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The businessman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, finally tucking his phone away. One of the women with mimosas whispered, "She's brave." Though whether it was admiration or disapproval, Evelyn could not tell. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. Brenda's eyes narrowed, weighing her next move. Evelyn knew this was the brink. One more step, and the situation would explode into something irreversible. But Evelyn's face remained calm, her posture unshaken. She had spent a lifetime learning how to hold her ground in rooms that told her she did not belong. This was just another room, another test. The engines hummed, steady and low, as if the plane itself was waiting to see which way the balance would tip. Brenda Miller lingered in the aisle like a shadow refusing to pass. Her arms were crossed now, her smile gone. She no longer pretended this was a polite request. It had shifted into something sharper, something that made the air around seat 2A feel thin. "Ma'am," Brenda said, her voice clear enough for most of the first-class cabin to hear, "I'll remind you once more. Refusing to comply with crew instructions can result in your removal from this aircraft." The businessman across the aisle coughed, as if to cut the silence. The women with mimosas exchanged glances, eyes flickering with both curiosity and unease. A young man a few rows back adjusted his phone discreetly, holding it low, as though he might be recording. Evelyn noticed. She always noticed. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Every investigator's instinct told her this was a critical junction. She weighed the options, yield and move to another seat, swallowing the humiliation, but avoiding the scene, or hold her ground and risk being dragged into an ordeal that could stain her name, her career, her life. She inhaled deeply. The cabin smelled faintly of stale coffee and citrus cleaner. She centered herself in that sensory detail, as if anchoring her body against the storm. Calmly, she replied, "I am seated in the place assigned to me. That is not non-compliance. That is not disruption." Her voice was quiet but steady. She spoke with the precision of someone trained to testify, each word chosen carefully, yet inside, fear twisted. She imagined uniformed officers stepping into the cabin. She had seen it before. She had written reports afterward, analyzing how a passenger had been labeled non-compliant when all they had done was refuse an unfair demand. She thought of Maya again, her daughter's hopeful eyes when she asked about Stanford, the way she had typed, "Love you," in that text just an hour ago. Evelyn wanted to shield her daughter from scenes like this. She wanted Maya to inherit a world where dignity wasn't something you had to fight for seat by seat. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "If you won't cooperate, I will need to involve security. I'm giving you one last chance." The phrase "last chance" chilled Evelyn. It wasn't just a threat. It was the edge of a cliff. Once stepped over, there was no turning back. Before Evelyn could answer, a man too rose back, leaned forward. His voice was a hiss meant for her, but loud enough to carry, "Just move. It's not worth it. Don't ruin the flight for everyone." Evelyn turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. She didn't speak, but her silence was its own reply. She saw in him the calculation of someone who had never been forced to defend his place, who thought peace was simply giving way. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the engines was steady, but tension pulsed louder. Evelyn felt sweat bead at the nape of her neck, though her face remained composed. Her hand rested lightly on her notebook, as if drawing strength from its weight. She thought about the countless hours she had spent in FAA hearings, listening to witnesses quiver as they recounted moments of intimidation. She had always admired those who kept their voices calm despite the tremor in their hands. Now she understood more deeply what courage cost. "Call security if you must," she said finally, her voice even, "but I will not give up my seat." The words fell like stones into water, rippling through the cabin. A woman in the back gasped softly. Someone else muttered, "Unbelievable," though it wasn't clear which side they meant. Brenda straightened, her lips pressed tight. She reached for the intercom handset near the galley. Evelyn watched her, heart-hammering, but her face revealed nothing. The handset clicked as Brenda pressed the button, her voice sharp as she requested assistance. The businessman across the aisle spoke then, his voice pitched low but audible. "You should really reconsider. Once security's involved, it gets messy. They don't care who you are." Evelyn's eyes flicked to him, then back to the seat back in front of her. She didn't reply. She was busy waging the war inside her. One part of her wanted desperately to shrink, to retreat, to let the storm pass. Another part deeper, steadier, rose like bedrock beneath her feet. She heard her mother's words again, clear as if spoken beside her. "Hold your space, even if your voice shakes." Her breathing slowed. She straightened her shoulders. If they dragged her off this plane, the world would see it, and the world needed to see it. Passengers shifted in their seats, restless. The man with the phone was certainly recording now, though he tried to be discreet. Evelyn was grateful. Documentation mattered. Without it, stories like this vanished into silence. She thought of all the reports she had filed where bias was denied, hidden under policy enforcement and safety concerns. She thought of how easily the truth could be buried. But not this time. The intercom clicked again as Brenda replaced the handset. She turned back. Her voice clipped. Security will be here shortly. Evelyn's heartbeat pounded in her chest, but her hands were steady. She closed her notebook and folded her arms loosely, as though settling in for the wait. The cabin was no longer an ordinary place. It was a stage, and everyone present was part of the audience, waiting for the next act. The aisle felt colder now. Brenda Miller stood near the galley, arms stiff, eyes flashing with the kind of authority that came less from rules and more from habit. Around her, passengers shifted uneasily, bracing themselves for confrontation. The murmur of voices rose and fell like small waves. Evelyn Hayes sat in 2A, her back straight, her hands folded calmly on her lap. On the outside, she looked unshaken. Inside, her pulse pounded, fierce and insistent, like the drumbeat before a march. She had been in hearings, investigations, accident sites where lives hung on seconds. But here, in this leather seat, the weight felt heavier. Because this wasn't about malfunctioning machines. It was about people who refused to see her humanity. She glanced briefly at the passengers watching. The businessman across the aisle avoided her eyes now, pretending to scroll his phone. The women with mimosas whispered in low voices. A young man in row 4 was no longer pretending his phone was angled just right, the small red recording light glowing. Evelyn noted it with relief. Documentation mattered. Then she heard it, the shuffle of footsteps at the far end of the jet bridge, the faint jingle of equipment on a belt. Security was coming. A sharp thought cut through her. If they take me off this plane, what will Maya see when the video spreads online? Her mother in handcuffs, her mother accused of disruption. The image pierced her heart. She would not let that happen. She reached slowly into her blazer pocket. Her fingers brushed against the smooth leather of her ID wallet. She paused, closing her eyes for a heartbeat. She could hear her mother's words echoing again. "Hold your space, baby." When she opened her eyes, they were clear, steady, and resolute. As Brenda turned back from the galley, ready to declare the cabin under control. Evelyn's hand moved. She pulled out the black wallet and flipped it open, revealing the crisp gold seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. The letters shone in the soft cabin light, undeniable, immovable. Her voice was calm, even, every syllable edged with quiet authority. "You are threatening a federal air safety investigator. On record. Would you like to continue?" The effect was electric. The cabin froze. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Brenda's face went pale. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came at first. She had expected compliance, maybe resistance, but not this. Not a badge that carried federal authority. Not words that turned the balance of power upside down. The businessman across the aisle leaned forward, his eyes wide. One of the women with mimosas gasped audibly. The young man's phone angled higher now, capturing every second. Brenda stammered, I wasn't aware." Her voice cracked, brittle as glass. Evelyn held her gaze, steady as stone. "Now you are." The shuffle of security footsteps grew louder in the jet bridge. Evelyn didn't flinch. She kept her badge visible, her voice calm but resonant enough for nearby passengers to hear. "My role is to protect the integrity and safety of air travel. That includes the conduct of crew. And right now, you are interfering with a paying passenger in a manner that violates both federal regulation and basic dignity." Her words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The precision of truth gave them weight. Brenda's lips trembled. She looked around the cabin, suddenly aware of the eyes on her. the recording phone, the silence that had turned against her. Her authority had evaporated, replaced by something else: accountability. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, cheerful and oblivious. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." The timing was almost cruel. Brenda's hands fumbled as she reached for the intercom near her. But Evelyn spoke again, cutting the silence with measured clarity. "Before you make another move, consider this: every action from this moment forward is documented. Every word, every choice. Do you still want to proceed?" It was the calm of someone who had lived her life in courtrooms and hearings, someone who understood that the most powerful voice wasn't always the loudest. Brenda lowered the handset. Her hands shook slightly. For a moment, she looked much smaller than when she had first loomed over seat 2A. The footsteps stopped at the cabin door. 2 uniformed security officers appeared, scanning the aisle for trouble. Brenda turned quickly, forcing a smile, and waved them off with a trembling hand. "All under control," she muttered. "No need." The officers exchanged a glance. Then one of them said, "If you're sure." Their eyes lingered briefly on Evelyn, noticing the badge in her hand, before stepping back out. The door closed. The jet bridge retracted. The plane was sealed now, but the silence inside was louder than the engines ever could be. Evelyn slowly folded her badge and slid it back into her pocket. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her face was composed, her hands steady, but her heart was still racing. She took a slow breath, grounding herself again in the leather of the seat beneath her, the hum of the ventilation, the notebook resting against her thigh. The businessman leaned slightly toward her, his voice hushed. You're with the FAA." Evelyn turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. Yes. He blinked, swallowed, and sat back without another word. "Across the aisle," one of the women whispered. "She's incredible." Her companion nodded, eyes still wide. Brenda, pale and rattled, retreated down the aisle toward the galley. She moved with the stiff steps of someone who knew the ground beneath her had shifted forever. For Evelyn, the moment was not triumph, it was relief and sorrow and something heavier. She thought about how close she had come to being dragged off that plane, labeled a problem, how quickly dignity could be stripped away by someone who assumed they had the right. She closed her eyes and exhaled. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stood up. She had simply refused to move. And in that refusal, she had shifted the story. The engines roared softly as the plane pushed back from the gate. The cabin tilted as it began to taxi. Around her, passengers fumbled with belts, stowed bags, whispered in urgent tones about what they had just witnessed. Evelyn sat quietly, her hand brushing the edge of her notebook, her mind replaying the moment again and again. She wondered how many other passengers, in other cabins, had not been able to pull out a badge. How many had been silenced, shamed, removed, unseen. Her heart ached, but she also felt a fire, low and steady, burning in her chest. This wasn't just about her. It never was. The plane taxied slowly along the runway lights, each flicker through the window marking the beats of Evelyn's racing thoughts. She sat still in seat 2A, but her mind replayed every detail of what had just unfolded: the badge, the silence, the trembling hands of Brenda Miller. She wanted to believe it was over, yet experience told her otherwise. Confrontations like this rarely ended clean. They left aftershocks. Sure enough, within minutes, the cockpit door cracked open. Captain Rodriguez stepped into the aisle, tall, composed, his pilot's cap tucked under one arm. He carried himself with a calmness that usually soothed nervous passengers, but his eyes scanned sharply, trying to measure the atmosphere. The cabin quieted. Even the clink of glasses from the galley ceased. All eyes tracked him. Rodriguez stopped near 2A, his gaze flicking from Evelyn to Brenda, who stood stiffly near the galley, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What's happening here?" His voice was firm, but not loud, the kind of tone meant to resolve, not inflame. Brenda jumped to speak. "Captain, there was an issue. This passenger refused to cooperate when asked to relocate for a medical accommodation." "I was about to handle it." Rodriguez raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed. "I don't need spin. I need facts." Evelyn didn't move right away. She considered her words carefully, as she always did. Then she reached calmly into her blazer and produced her FAA credentials again, holding them where the captain could see. "I am Dr. Evelyn Hayes," she said evenly. "Senior investigator, Federal Aviation Administration. I was assigned this seat. I was threatened with removal by your crew without cause." A visible ripple went through the cabin. The businessman across the aisle exhaled audibly. One of the women with mimosas muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Rodriguez's posture stiffened. He leaned closer, eyes fixed on the seal of the badge. He studied it for only a second before meeting Evelyn's gaze. What he saw there was unmistakable certainty, composure, authority rooted not in bluster, but in truth. He straightened. "Dr. Hayes," he said slowly, "thank you for identifying yourself. I apologize for the treatment you experienced." His tone shifted then, turning sharper as he pivoted toward Brenda. "Miller? Galley? Now?" Brenda hesitated. Her jaw worked as if she might argue. But under the captain's unwavering stare, she turned on her heel and marched to the galley, her shoulders tight, her steps clipped. Rodriguez lowered his voice to Evelyn, though the surrounding passengers leaned in, desperate to catch every word. "I will personally handle this. Please know, your presence here is respected and protected." Evelyn gave a single nod. "Thank you, Captain. My concern is not only myself, but the precedent set for passengers who don't carry credentials like mine." Her words hung heavy in the air. Rodriguez held her gaze a moment longer, then inclined his head. "Understood." He returned to the galley. For several minutes, muffled voices drifted forward, sharp tones of reprimand barely concealed by the whir of engines. Passengers exchanged glances, whispers running up and down the aisle like current. When Rodriguez reemerged, his expression was set, controlled. He addressed the cabin as a whole. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will continue to our destination without further interruption. If you have concerns, I encourage you to document them, and they will be reviewed." It was professional, measured, but his eyes lingered briefly on Evelyn before he retreated to the cockpit. And that look carried more than words. It carried recognition. The plane began its turn onto the runway. The engines deepened into their takeoff growl. Passengers leaned back, some gripping armrests, others clutching drinks. Evelyn closed her eyes and steadied her breathing as the jet thundered forward, pressing them all into their seats. As the plane lifted, the city lights fell away beneath them, tiny jewels scattered on dark velvet. Evelyn kept her eyes closed, her hand pressed against the pocket where her badge rested. Relief came in fragments, mixed with a sobering truth. She had won the moment, but she could not shake the question. What if she hadn't been who she was? What if she had been someone else without credentials, without authority, without a platform to push back? The thought hollowed her chest. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, conversation flooded back into the cabin. The young man in row 4 was still recording, whispering into his phone about what had happened. The businessman across the aisle finally leaned over again, his voice low, almost ashamed. "I should have spoken up," he admitted. "When she first asked you to move, I knew it wasn't right. I just froze." Evelyn opened her eyes and studied him. His face was lined, the kind that had spent decades in boardrooms, probably wielding authority himself. And yet, in that moment, he had stayed silent. "You saw," she said quietly, "and now you know silence has weight." He swallowed and nodded. "You're right." The two women across the aisle were less subdued. One leaned forward, eyes bright with admiration. "You were incredible. I've never seen anyone stand so calm while being pushed like that. I would have snapped." Evelyn offered the smallest of smiles. Calm doesn't always mean unshaken. Sometimes it's the only shield you have. Her voice softened at the edges, and something in her tone made the woman's smile fade into thoughtfulness. From the galley, Brenda remained absent. Passengers craned their necks now and then, but she did not return. Another flight attendant, younger and visibly nervous, stepped in to manage the cabin service. His hands shook slightly as he poured water into plastic cups, but he offered Evelyn an extra napkin with trembling sincerity. "Ma'am," he whispered, I'm sorry for what you went through." She accepted the napkin, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Thank you," she said simply. As the plane leveled off above the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed. A hush fell, broken only by the soft clatter of ice in glasses and the rustle of magazines. Yet under the surface, a charge lingered. Everyone knew they had witnessed something rare, an imbalance of power confronted and rebalanced. Evelyn leaned back in her seat. Closing her eyes once more, her heartbeat slowed. But the fire inside her did not dim. She thought of her daughter. She thought of every unnamed passenger who had been told they didn't belong, who hadn't had a badge to shield them. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "This isn't over." The clouds outside glowed silver under the moonlight. The engines droned steady and strong. But in Seat Tao, Evelyn Hayes carried a storm that had only just begun to gather. The cabin had settled into a fragile calm, like the uneasy quiet after a summer storm. Passengers murmured in low tones, some pretending nothing had happened, others still glancing toward Seat 2A with stolen curiosity. Brenda Miller had not returned from the galley, and the young replacement attendant moved cautiously, as though afraid of breaking the fragile balance. Evelyn Hayes sat still, the faint glow from her reading light softening the angles of her face. In her lap rested a leather-bound notebook, its cover worn from years of use. She opened it slowly, her pen poised above the first blank page of the flight. She wrote the date, the flight number, the crew names she had heard. She noted the time of boarding, the sequence of events, the exact words Brenda had used. Each detail fell neatly onto the page, the ink steady despite the tremor in her chest. Her training demanded this precision, but it was more than duty. Writing gave her distance, a place to place the ache. Across the aisle, the businessman watched her hand move. His eyes flicked between her face and the notebook, curiosity flickering behind guilt. He looked as if he wanted to ask a question, but thought better of it. Instead, He cleared his throat and turned back to his tablet. Though his attention clearly wandered, Evelyn didn't notice. Her focus moved elsewhere, her mind cataloging small things others might overlook. The overhead bin above row 3 had been left slightly ajar, its latch not fully secure. She had seen it during takeoff, the corner gaping enough to spill in turbulence. She wrote it down. She recalled how another attendant, Paul Evans, she had caught his name on the crew badge, had rushed through the exit row briefing. His words were clipped, almost inaudible, recited without eye contact. Regulations required clarity. She marked it in her notes. Even the carpet near the galley caught her attention. Frayed, worn thin, a potential hazard in an evacuation. She noted it, her pen scratching quietly as engines hummed in the background. She wasn't searching for errors to condemn. She was seeing what was there, as she always did. Her work demanded not just investigation after tragedy, but vigilance before it. Tonight, her vigilance came with a personal weight heavier than most. The younger attendant approached, carrying a tray of water and ginger ale. His hand trembled slightly as he set the cup on her tray table. "Here, ma'am. Thought you might want something." Evelyn looked up, her eyes softening at his unease. "Thank you," she said gently. He nodded quickly, almost gratefully, before moving on. His shoulders eased just a fraction after her words, as if the smallest kindness had steadied him. She turned back to her notes. Each word was not just record, it was testimony, in case anyone later tried to erase what had happened. But writing also gave space for thought, and thoughts came heavy. She imagined again how the scene might have played out if she had been someone else. A single mother on her first trip, a student traveling for an interview, an elder without the reflex to push back. They would have been told to move. They would have been shamed, humiliated, perhaps escorted off as passengers rolled their eyes, blaming them for delays. The injustice pressed against her ribs. She wrote one line in the margin, not for a report, but for herself. Authority should never come at the cost of dignity. Her hand stilled on the page. She thought of Maya again, her daughter's wide eyes when she had spoken once about bias. How Maya had asked, "Mom, will it ever stop?" Evelyn had answered honestly then, "Not easily, but we fight by holding ground." The plane jolted slightly, a pocket of turbulence rippling through. Overhead, bins rattled, glasses clinked. The latch above row 3 popped fully open now, swinging an inch. Passengers flinched. Evelyn calmly unbuckled, stood, and clicked it shut with one firm press. The businessman across the aisle blinked. You noticed that before she sat back down, buckling her belt again. "It's my job to notice," he exhaled. "You really do see everything?" "Not everything," she corrected softly. "Just enough to know what matters." The hum of engines steadied again. The young man in row 4 adjusted his phone, whispering commentary to his viewers. "She just fixed the bin. The crew didn't even notice. Man, this is wild." His voice was low, but Evelyn caught it. She knew the video would spread far beyond this cabin. She did not resent it. Truth often needed a witness. From the galley. Muffled sounds suggested Brenda was still there, perhaps arguing quietly with another attendant, perhaps wrestling with the collapse of authority she had always assumed unquestioned. Evelyn wondered briefly what went through Brenda's mind now: defensiveness, fear, shame, maybe all of it at once. But Evelyn did not dwell. Her work, her mission, wasn't to savor Brenda's discomfort. It was to ensure this incident became more than one woman's humiliation. It needed to expose something systemic. She wrote again, pattern, not accident. Her eyes lingered on the words, and a pulse of anger stirred beneath her calm. Patterns were harder to deny. They forced acknowledgement, and acknowledgement, eventually, led to change. The businessman spoke again, his voice hushed but earnest. You know, I've flown for decades. First class, upgrades, all of it. I've never had to prove I belonged, not once. Evelyn turned to him, her gaze level. That's the difference. For you, the seat is assumed. For me, it's questioned. He shifted, uncomfortable, but he didn't look away this time. He absorbed it, heavy as it was. Silence followed. Not empty silence, but thoughtful, weighted, the kind that lingers because it matters. Evelyn let it rest. She leaned back, closing her notebook for now. Outside, the moon bathed the clouds in silver. The engines hummed steady, carrying them westward. Her eyelids lowered briefly, exhaustion tugging at her. But her grip on the notebook remained firm, as if even in sleep she would not release her hold on truth. This was not just about a seat. It never had been. It was about who was told they belonged, and who was told they did not. And tonight, Evelyn Hayes had chosen to stay seated not just for herself, but for all the unseen passengers who had been forced to rise. At 36,000 feet, the cabin looked calm on the surface. Lights were dimmed, window shades pulled down, passengers drifting into drowsy half-sleep. Yet beneath the hush, an invisible current lingered an awareness that the night's events had unsettled the balance of the flight. Evelyn Hayes sat in 2A with her notebook closed now, her fingers resting lightly on its cover. She had documented enough for the moment. Her gaze wandered to the aisle, to the nervous attendant pouring water with too much care, to the galley door that stayed shut far longer than it should have. Brenda Miller was hiding. Evelyn knew the pattern well when authority collapsed in public. Some people doubled down, others withdrew. Brenda had chosen retreat. But the silence from the galley was not just personal. It was professional negligence. On any flight, the senior attendant's absence left gaps. Gaps bred risk. Evelyn made a note in her mind. Across the aisle, the businessman had given up pretending to work. His tablet sat dark on his lap. He stole glances at Evelyn now and then, as if measuring her stillness, trying to understand how someone could withstand public humiliation and yet radiate calm. Further back, the young man with the phone was still recording, whispering commentary to his unseen audience. She hasn't said a word in half an hour, just writing, then sitting there, like she's carved from stone, but you can feel it like she's in control of the whole plane. Evelyn didn't hear him clearly, but she sensed his eyes. She let it be. If truth spread through shaky footage, so be it. Sometimes the messenger didn't matter as much as the message. She thought again of Maya. What would her daughter think, watching this unfold on a stranger's screen? Pride, maybe fear, certainly. Children carried both. She pushed the thought aside gently and shifted her focus. From the galley, muffled voices rose. The younger attendant his name tag had read, Jordan Lee, was speaking quietly, but emotion sharpened his tone. Brenda's sharper voice cut across his, brittle, defensive. Evelyn couldn't make out every word, but fragments reached her, blew it out of proportion. Not the first complaint. I know how to do my job. Her ears sharpened. Not the first complaint. The phrase echoed in her chest. She glanced down at her notebook again, flipping to a blank page. She wrote prior history patterns of misconduct. Her investigator's instincts stirred. Cases like this were rarely isolated. One flare of bias usually hid years of embers beneath. And if Brenda had left a trail, it would not stay hidden for long. At that very moment, in a quiet office miles below, an FAA duty officer was already receiving an encrypted message. Evelyn's ID swipe at boarding, her open display of credentials, had automatically triggered a protocol one she herself had helped design. Any in-flight incident involving an investigator generated an immediate log entry. As that entry now blinked across Jack Riley's screen, Jack Riley, head investigator, leaned back in his chair, frowning. Evelyn Hayes. He knew her reputation meticulous, unyielding, respected, even among skeptics. If she had raised her badge mid-flight, something serious had happened. He tapped a few keys. Within minutes, he had accessed the airline's internal records flagged for crew complaints. Brenda Miller's name popped up more than once. Passenger reports of hostility, a pattern of targeting minorities some dismissed as misunderstandings, others closed without action. Jack's frown deepened. He began pulling every log, every archived note, every internal audit touching Brenda's record, back on the plane. Evelyn felt none of this directly, but her instincts told her truth was moving. The system was awakening, slow but steady, like gears grinding into motion. The businessman broke the silence again. His voice was softer now, more reflective. You've probably seen more of these incidents than most of us could imagine. Evelyn turned her head, studying his lined face. Yes, she said simply. He hesitated, then added, Why stay so calm? I mean, if it were me, I'd have lost my temper long ago. Her gaze softened, not unkind, but weighted, because anger would have become the story, not the truth. Sometimes restraint is the only way to be heard. He absorbed that, nodding slowly. His shoulders sank a little, as if something in him had shifted. Further down the cabin, the two women with mimosas spoke in hushed voices. She carries herself like she's done this her whole life, one whispered. The other replied, Maybe that's what it takes to survive. Always ready. Their words, though not meant for her ears, floated to Evelyn anyway. She didn't flinch. They weren't wrong. The plane hummed steadily, slicing through darkness above the continent. Evelyn closed her notebook again, but her thoughts remained sharp. She imagined Jack Riley in some distant office, already piecing the puzzle together. She imagined auditors pulling records, lawyers calculating risks, executives drafting statements. She had seen it too many times. Change never began willingly. It began when systems were forced to look at themselves in the mirror. And tonight, that mirror was seat 2A, from the galley. Brenda emerged briefly, her face pale, her expression strained. She avoided Evelyn's gaze entirely, focusing instead on checking overhead compartments with stiff, unnecessary gestures. Her authority had shriveled. The passengers knew it. Evelyn knew it. Brenda herself knew it most of all. When she passed row 4, the young man's phone angled toward her. She flinched, then quickened her pace back to the galley. Whispers followed her retreat. Evelyn sat still, steady, letting the moment speak for itself. She didn't need to pursue Brenda. The truth would. Hours later, when the plane began its descent, the cabin stirred awake. Seatbacks clicked upright. Tray tables latched. Evelyn glanced at her notes one last time, her pen tapping the margin. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing again what she had witnessed, what she had endured, what she must now carry forward. As the wheels touched down, a jolt ran through the fuselage. Passengers exhaled, relief and fatigue mingling. For them, the journey was over. For Evelyn Hayes, it had just begun. Morning light streamed through the blinds of Jack Riley's office, thin stripes across the stacks of files and coffee-stained memos. He had stayed through the night, combing records, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. The blinking log entry had pulled him in hours ago. Incident: Attendant Flight 812. Investigator Hayes present. Badge displayed. Crew misconduct suspected. Jack knew Evelyn. Not socially, he had never shared a meal with her. Never spoken about family, but professionally. And that was enough. In the world of air safety, reputations mattered. Evelyn Hayes was the kind of investigator who never filed a report lightly. If she had raised her badge in a cabin, then whatever happened was no small misunderstanding. His fingers tapped keys as he pulled crew records. Brenda Miller's profile filled the screen. 15 years of service, commendations for punctuality, efficiency, but also something else, a trail of complaints. Passenger filed 2015. Targeted my teenage son for suspicious behavior when all he did was ask for water. Case closed. Misunderstanding. Passenger filed 2018. Told me upgrades weren't available. White couple boarded moments later in the same cabin. Case closed. No further action. Passenger filed 2021. Hostile during service. Accused me of lying about seat assignment. I felt singled out. Case closed. Insufficient evidence. Jack scrolled, his jaw tightening. 12 complaints total. 9 involving passengers of color. Each neatly filed away. Smoothed over, forgotten. He rubbed his temples. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about a culture of denial, a system too quick to protect itself. He opened another folder: maintenance audits for the Atlanta hub, Brenda's home base, irregularities flagged, training cutbacks, shortened customer service refreshers, pressure from upper management to prioritize efficiency. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Patterns. Always patterns. He reached for the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Naomi Park, came the voice on the other end, clipped and alert. She was one of the FAA's sharpest data analysts, the kind who could see trends buried in thousands of lines of text. Naomi, it's Jack. I need you on something. Pull everything you can on Attendant's crew conduct complaints in the last 5 years. Passenger demographics, outcomes, closures, and cross-check with Brenda Miller's record. A pause. Then you think it's systemic, I don't think, Jack said grimly. I know. Back on Flight 8112, the cabin had landed. Passengers shuffled out, some still whispering about what they'd seen, others already burying it under the weight of their own lives. Evelyn walked calmly through the terminal, her badge tucked away again, her notebook secure in her bag. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside she felt the dual weight of exhaustion and purpose. She knew Jack Riley would be watching the logs. She knew the gears were already turning. That gave her some comfort, but not enough. In the baggage claim hall, she paused. Around her, families reunited. Travelers hurried for connections. Children clung to parents' hands. She watched it all, her mind replaying Brenda's pale face, the silence of the galley, the way passengers had both witnessed and hesitated. She thought of Maya again, and of the words she had whispered to herself mid-flight. This isn't over. By the next morning, headlines had begun to trickle onto news sites, not yet explosive, but noticeable. Passenger reports. Bias on Attendant flight. Video surfaces confrontation in first class. The young man in row 4 had uploaded his footage. The clip spread quickly across social media. Brenda's stiff stance, Evelyn's calm refusal, the flash of the FAA badge, Hashtags formed, discussions lit up. Jack Riley watched it all unfold on his monitor, one window showing the trending feed, another displaying his expanding data set. Naomi's analysis was brutal in its clarity. A disproportionate number of Attendant complaints involved minority passengers. Most were dismissed without full review. He pressed the phone again. Naomi, flag this to the Enforcement Division. We're opening a formal inquiry. In Attendant headquarters. Panic simmered. David Thompson, Vice President of Operations, sat in a conference room staring at the same viral video Jack had watched. His jaw clenched. He had signed off on the last round of training cutbacks. He had dismissed concerns about Brenda months ago. Now the internet was chewing on the airline's reputation like wolves on bone. He barked into the speakerphone. Get ahead of this. Issue a statement, isolated incident. Deeply regret. The usual. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. He knew Brenda wasn't the only one. He knew the system was stretched, brittle, cracked. And he knew Evelyn Hayes would not let this go. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling at her elbow. Her notebook lay open, pages dense with notes, arrows, underlined phrases. She had documented safety lapses, procedural breaches, conduct violations. But what mattered most was the truth behind them. She paused, her pen hovering. Then she wrote a single line, underlined twice, change must cost something, or it will not last. She closed the book, exhaled, and glanced toward Maya's bedroom. The light under the door was out. Her daughter was asleep, safe, unaware of the storm brewing. Evelyn whispered a quiet promise to the silence. For you, always for you. In FAA headquarters, Jack Riley sent the first round of subpoenas. In Attendant headquarters, executives scrambled to contain fallout. In online forums, strangers debated bias, fairness, authority. And in the middle of it all, Evelyn Hayes prepared herself. She knew the fight had shifted beyond one flight, beyond one crew member. It had become something larger, something systemic. And she would not step aside. The storm broke 3 days later. News outlets that had first treated the video as a curiosity now splashed it across front pages. Cable anchors replayed the moment in endless loops. Evelyn Hayes lifting her badge, Brenda Miller's face draining of color, the hush that followed. Social media platforms burned with hashtags, #WowZoomCO, #BowsFud, dignity, in the air. Morning commuters scrolling their phones muttered to themselves. About time someone stood up. College students stitched reactions to the clip, their voices angry and hopeful. Parents shook their heads and said, "That could have been my kid." At FAA headquarters, Jack Riley watched the coverage unfold on multiple screens. His desk was buried under stacks of printed complaints. Charts from Naomi Park, subpoenas waiting for delivery. The inquiry had grown too large to be contained quietly. Congress was calling. The Department of Transportation was calling. Everyone wanted answers. Jack straightened his tie and walked into the press briefing room. Cameras clicked. Lights glared. Reporters shouted questions before he even reached the podium. Mr. Riley, has the FAA opened a formal case against Attendant? Is this about one flight attendant? Or something bigger? Will Investigator Hayes be testifying? Jack raised a hand for silence. His voice, when it came, was steady, measured. The FAA has launched a formal investigation into Attendant Airlines, specifically regarding patterns of passenger treatment and compliance with anti-discrimination regulations. We are reviewing extensive records, and yes, the events of Flight 812 are part of that review. Hands shot up. What about Brenda Miller? What about David Thompson? Jack's gaze hardened. We do not comment on individual personnel matters at this stage. What I will say is this: the integrity of air travel depends not just on machines, but on people. And when people fail, systems must answer. The words rippled through headlines within the hour. At Attendant headquarters, the air smelled of panic. David Thompson sat at the head of a mahogany conference table. Executives arrayed around him. His hair was neatly combed, his tie perfectly knotted, but sweat clung to the back of his neck. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped, slamming a folder shut. "We cannot let one incident define this airline." An executive across the table shifted uncomfortably. "It's not just one incident, David. The data doesn't lie. 9 complaints dismissed in Miller's file alone. And Naomi Park's analysis shows David cut him off. I don't care what their analysis shows. We control the narrative. Issue another statement. Emphasize training, our commitment to passengers, all of it." But even as he spoke, he knew the control was slipping. The video had cracked something wide open. Meanwhile, Evelyn Hayes sat quietly at her kitchen table once more, notebook open, tea steaming beside her. Her phone buzzed with messages, calls from journalists, requests for interviews, invitations to appear on national broadcasts. She declined them all. She had no need to be the face of outrage. She had done her part. Now the system had to work. But she also knew silence carried risk. If she didn't speak, others would define the story for her. That evening, she agreed to one interview with Lisa Ramirez, a journalist she trusted, a woman who had built her career amplifying voices without exploiting them. Lisa arrived with a small camera crew, respectful, subdued. She asked Evelyn only 2 questions that mattered. "What was going through your mind when you showed your badge?" Evelyn looked into the lens, her voice soft but clear. "That my daughter might see me humiliated, dragged off a plane, labeled disruptive, and I refused to let that be her memory of me." Lisa nodded, her eyes glistening. "And what do you want people to take from this?" Evelyn hesitated, then said, "That dignity is not a privilege granted by a ticket. It is a right every passenger carries with them, from the moment they board until the moment they leave. If we forget that, we forget the very reason air travel exists, to carry people, not just bodies, but lives, stories, hopes." The clip aired that night. Millions watched. Many wept. Some argued, but no one forgot it. In Washington, congressional aides clipped her words into briefing packets. Lawmakers muttered about hearings, about new regulations, about accountability. In Atlanta, Brenda Miller sat in a union office, staring at her hands. Reporters camped outside the building. Her phone buzzed with messages she no longer answered. She replayed the moment over and over in her head, the way Evelyn had looked at her, calm, unshaken, while she herself had unraveled. Shame and anger warred inside her, neither giving peace, and David Thompson, facing mounting pressure, prepared his defense. He rehearsed lines in front of a mirror. Isolated incident. No tolerance for bias. Deep regret. The words tasted hollow, even to him. But the world was moving faster than his spin. By the end of the week, the FAA announced public hearings. Evelyn Hayes would testify. Jack Riley would present data. Naomi Park would show patterns. And Brenda Miller and David Thompson would be called to answer. The stage was set. That night, Evelyn closed her notebook with deliberate care. She stood at Maya's doorway, watching her daughter sleep, one arm curled under her cheek. Evelyn whispered again the promise she had carried through the turbulence, through the confrontation, through the storm of attention. "For you, For everyone who doesn't get to hold a badge. And for the first time in days, she let herself breathe deeply. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally, undeniably, begun. The hearing room in Washington buzzed like a hive. Rows of cameras lined the back wall, red recording lights blinking. Reporters whispered to one another, laptops balanced on knees, fingers ready to capture every phrase. Congressional aides hustled stacks of binders to committee members. The air smelled faintly of coffee, old wood, and anticipation. Dr. Evelyn Hayes sat at the witness table, her FAA badge resting beside her notes. She wore a simple navy suit, her hands folded calmly in front of her. To her left sat Jack Riley, steady and sharp. To her right, Naomi Park arranged charts and data. Behind them, rows of observers' advocates, airline workers. Passengers who had filed complaints leaned forward in their chairs, waiting. At another table sat Brenda Miller. Her shoulders slumped as though the weight of every camera bore down on her. A union lawyer whispered in her ear, but her eyes stayed locked on the tabletop, avoiding Evelyn's gaze. Farther down, David Thompson shifted in his chair, jaw tight, face pale under the fluorescent lights. The committee chair, Senator Grace Holloway, gavelled the session to order. Her voice cut through the murmur. We are here to examine allegations of systemic discrimination and misconduct within Attendant Airlines, brought to national attention by the events of Flight 812. Let us proceed. The first questions were directed to Jack Riley. He presented the findings with methodical precision. 12 years of data, 92 complaints flagged, 37 involving passengers of color. Charts lit up on screens, lines climbing where they should have fallen, bars stacked in grim patterns. Mr. Riley, a senator asked, are you saying this is not an isolated incident? Jack's reply was crisp. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of bias, dismissed complaints, and management indifference. The incident involving Dr. Hayes is emblematic, not exceptional. Murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed closer. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She adjusted the microphone, looked once around the chamber, then spoke in the measured cadence that had become her hallmark. I boarded Flight 812 as any passenger would with a ticket I had purchased, a seat I was assigned. What followed was not about procedure. It was about presumption. A presumption that someone like me did not belong in that seat. Her voice never rose, yet the words landed like stones in water, sending silent ripples across the room. She recounted the exchange with Brenda Miller, the demand to move, the threat of removal, the moment she presented her badge. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She simply laid the truth bare. When I revealed my credentials, the atmosphere changed instantly. Respect that should have been present all along was suddenly granted. But what about the passengers who cannot hold up a badge? What about those who are silenced or shamed into compliance? Their dignity matters no less than mine. Gasps and nods filled the chamber. Some wiped at their eyes. Senator Holloway leaned forward. Dr. Hayes, what do you believe must change? Evelyn answered without hesitation. Accountability. Training is not enough. Policies are not enough. We need systems that respond when bias surfaces, systems that protect passengers before humiliation occurs, not after. Her words drew a standing ovation from many in the audience, though the gavel quickly restored order. Next came Brenda Miller. She raised her eyes only briefly, voice trembling. I made a mistake. I thought I was protecting a passenger who needed accommodation. I never intended. A senator interrupted. Ms. Miller, Records show 9 prior complaints against you, nearly all from minority passengers. Were they all mistakes? Brenda's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Evelyn then, for the first time since the flight. In Evelyn's calm gaze, she saw no gloating, no vengeance, only truth. Brenda's shoulders sagged further. "I was wrong," she whispered, over and over. "I was wrong." The room was still. Finally, David Thompson took the microphone. His tone was sharp, rehearsed. "Attendant is committed to diversity and inclusion. We regret this incident and have taken steps to Mr. Thompson," Senator Holloway cut in. "Internal emails show you instructed staff to suppress upgrades that look like charity cases. Do you deny sending this directive?" David flushed. Those words were taken out of context. Holloway shot back. "Does not erase intent. You fostered a culture where bias thrived." David stammered, searching for footing, but the ground beneath him was gone. The hearing stretched on for hours, but the narrative was already written. Evelyn Hayes had spoken with quiet authority. Jack Riley and Naomi Park had provided unshakable evidence. Brenda Miller had admitted fault, and David Thompson had revealed his arrogance to the world. As the gavel finally struck to adjourn, the cameras turned once more to Evelyn. She gathered her notes, slipped her badge back into her jacket pocket, and rose. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes burst like fireworks, but she walked out with steady steps. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky overcast but wide. Evelyn paused at the top of the steps, inhaling deeply. Around her, people pressed forward, advocates, passengers, strangers who had watched the video and come to see justice unfold. A woman in the crowd called out, "Thank you for standing up for us." Evelyn met her eyes and offered a small, gentle smile. "For all of us," she said. And then she moved forward, into the press of people, into the next chapter of the fight. The verdict came in late autumn. The air outside the FAA headquarters carried the scent of falling leaves, a reminder that seasons change even when institutions resist. The FAA consent decree against Attendant Airlines was announced at a press conference that drew every major network. Jack Riley read the order aloud in his steady voice. A $2.8 million civil penalty for systemic violations. A 2-year independent monitoring program requiring quarterly reports on passenger treatment. Mandatory anti-bias training for all flight and ground crew, with certification required for continued employment. A newly created Passenger Dignity Office, empowered to investigate complaints directly and publish findings without interference. The decree went further. Passengers removed under questionable circumstances would receive automatic review, and a public database would track all complaints. Transparency was no longer optional. It was law. For Brenda Miller, the consequences were personal and devastating. She was formally terminated, her certification revoked. Without a license, she could no longer work in aviation. Months later, she found a job tending bar at a hotel near the airport. On her first night, she froze when she saw a plane lifting into the dusk sky through the lobby window. Regret clung to her like the smell of old liquor. One evening, Evelyn Hayes passed through that same hotel, en route to a conference. Their eyes met across the bar. Brenda straightened, as though expecting judgment, but Evelyn only gave a small nod. No words, no condemnation, just acknowledgement. For Brenda, that quiet grace cut deeper than anger ever could. David Thompson fared no better. The board of Attendant forced his resignation, citing misconduct and loss of stakeholder confidence. His severance was stripped when internal audits confirmed falsified maintenance logs under his watch. Newspapers ran photos of him leaving headquarters with a single cardboard box. His name vanished from the airline industry within weeks, remembered only as a cautionary tale. For Evelyn, the months after the decree were filled with both exhaustion and renewal. She continued her investigative work, but she also allowed herself space for ordinary joys, taking Maya to Saturday morning soccer games, cooking stew on chilly evenings, tending to her small backyard garden. At first, she resisted the spotlight, yet invitations poured in from universities, advocacy groups, even Congress again. Reluctantly, she accepted some, realizing her voice could help shape not only regulations, but culture. At a university lecture hall packed with students, she stood at the podium and spoke not about herself, but about responsibility. Rules matter, she said, her tone steady. But it is people who bring them to life. Each of you, whether you fly planes or fix engines or simply take your seat as a passenger, carries the power to uphold or to diminish another's dignity. Choose wisely. Applause thundered. Students approached afterward with tears in their eyes, saying, "You sound like my mother," or "That happened to me once." She listened to them all. Maya, watching from the front row, beamed with quiet pride. 6 months after the hearing, Attendant held a public ceremony to launch its Passenger Dignity Office. Evelyn was invited, not as an investigator, but as an honored guest. She declined to speak on stage, but stood in the audience, watching as new policies were unveiled. Complaint kiosks in airports, anonymous reporting apps, diversity officers stationed in hubs. She noticed employees paying attention in a way that felt different, less defensive, more earnest. The changes would not erase the past, but they promised a better future. One evening, Evelyn and Maya sat on their porch, sipping hot chocolate as the first snow of winter drifted down. Maya leaned against her mother and whispered, "Are you glad you showed them your badge?" Evelyn smiled, watching the snow settle on the railing. "I'm glad I showed them who I was. But more than that, I'm glad I stood up for everyone who didn't have a badge to hold." Maya thought for a long moment, then said softly, "Then maybe one day, no one will need a badge at all." Evelyn kissed the top of her daughter's head. "That's the world we're working toward." The night grew still, the sky wide and open. Evelyn felt the weight of months lift, replaced by something steadier hope. Not naive hope, but hard-won, forged through struggle and truth. And as another plane traced a silver arc across the stars, she whispered the words that had guided her all along. Dignity is not granted, it is lived. The story of Flight 812 would be told and retold in classrooms, boardrooms, even training manuals. But for Evelyn Hayes, the true ending was not in the headlines or hearings. It was here, in the quiet, beside her daughter, with the knowledge that standing firm in one's seat had helped countless others hold their own. Life often confronts us in moments we least expect with unfairness, with disrespect, with a test of our dignity. The story of Dr. Evelyn Hayes reminds us that true strength is not always loud or forceful. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to stand firm, even when the world tries to move you. Many of us, especially as we grow older, know what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. It might not happen on an airplane, but it can happen in hospitals, in workplaces, or even within our own families. Evelyn's story teaches us that dignity is not something others can grant or take away. It is something we must choose to protect for ourselves. And perhaps even more importantly, it teaches us that standing up for ourselves has ripple effects. When Evelyn refused to move, she was not just holding her seat. She was holding space for countless others who had been silenced before her. The lesson is clear: it's never too late, never too small, and never too ordinary to claim respect. In doing so, we leave the world a little more just for those who come after us. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like Evelyn's remind us of the power of dignity, courage, and truth. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and build a community where every story matters.